It starts with a cyclist on a gravel loop road, 17 miles into the Everglades, when she sees something that doesn't look real. An alligator, half submerged in a canal, isn't moving. Its jaws are locked around something long and thick and patterned, a shape too big to be a fish, too muscular to be anything ordinary. For a second, she thinks she's looking at two dead animals. Then the alligator's eye opens. It's watching her. In its mouth is a Burmese python, one of the most efficient killing machines ever released into a North American wetland, and the alligator is not letting go. This isn't the plot of a Nature Channel special. It's a moment that has now been caught on camera again and again across South Florida, and each time it goes viral for the same reason. For 25 years, the story of the Everglades has been about pythons winning. This is the rare footage of something pushing back. The cyclist who filmed this particular encounter, an amateur wildlife photographer named Allison Joslin, has actually captured more than one of these standoffs while riding the same 15-mile loop through Everglades National Park. She's photographed alligators hauling pythons through canals on separate occasions, months apart. When she posted the footage online, it spread through Florida wildlife groups almost instantly, with one line repeated in the comments over and over, "Score one for the home team." That phrase is doing more work than it seems. It frames the alligator not as a predator doing what predators do, but as a defender. Something native, something that belongs, finally landing a hit against an intruder that has spent 2.5 decades reshaping an entire ecosystem almost unopposed. To understand why that single bite matters enough to make people cheer for an alligator, you have to understand what these snakes have already done to this landscape, and why almost nothing in Florida has been able to stop them. Burmese pythons are not from Florida. They're native to Southeast Asia, where they evolved over millions of years alongside prey animals that developed defenses against them. Florida's mammals never got that chance. When pet pythons were released or escaped into the Everglades, likely starting in the 1980s and accelerating after Hurricane Andrew damaged breeding facilities in 1992. They arrived in a landscape with no natural checks on their population. The result has been one of the most documented ecological collapses in the country. Surveys by the U.S., opossums, bobcats, and rabbits have all but vanished from large stretches of the park. Go hours without spotting a single mammal that used to be common. The math behind that collapse is simple and brutal. A single female Burmese python can lay between 50 and 100 eggs in a clutch. They have no natural predators in Florida capable of controlling their numbers at scale. And they grow enormous, routinely reaching 10 to 16 feet, with confirmed specimens caught in Florida exceeding 18 feet and weighing well over 100 pounds. Picture what that actually looks like in the water. An animal roughly the length of a school bus's interior, thick as a fire hydrant at its widest point, capable of swallowing prey, far larger than its own head by unhinging its jaw. That's not an exaggeration for effect. It's simply how constrictor anatomy works. A python's lower jaw is only loosely connected to its skull, allowing it to stretch around prey that would seem physically impossible to fit inside. For over 2 decades, the state's answer has been human intervention, contracted hunters. An annual public hunting competition called the Florida Python Challenge, where participants compete for cash prizes based on how many snakes they remove. Radio-tagged Judas snakes, sterilized male pythons released back into the wild specifically, so researchers can track them during breeding season and follow them straight to the females they seek out. Then remove the whole aggregation. All of it has helped. Thousands of pythons have been removed since these programs began, but none of it has come close to eliminating the population, which researchers estimate could number in the tens of thousands across South Florida. That number is worth sitting with. Tens of thousands of apex predators, most of them never seen, hidden in sawgrass marsh and mangrove tunnels across an area larger than some entire states. Human hunters, no matter how skilled, are working against a landscape built almost perfectly to hide its intruders. So when video started circulating of alligators actually killing and eating adult pythons, wildlife biologists paid close attention. Because if there is one animal in the Everglades old enough, strong enough, and ancient enough to fight back, it's the one that was already an apex predator here millions of years before the first python escaped a backyard enclosure. Let's slow down and understand what's actually happening in that water, because it isn't a simple case of one predator beating another. Alligators are ambush hunters. They rely on bite force, not speed. An adult alligator's jaws can exert several thousand pounds of pressure, among the strongest bite forces of any living animal. Pythons, by contrast, are constrictors. They don't bite to kill, they wrap around prey and squeeze, cutting off blood flow until the heart stops. 2 very different killing strategies, evolved millions of years and continents apart, now competing directly for the same wetland. Think of it like 2 different fighting styles that evolve for completely different problems. The alligator's bite is built for a single decisive moment, a strategy suited to an animal that spends most of its life motionless, waiting. The python's coil is built for control over time, a strategy suited to an animal with no venom and no crushing bite of its own, needing another way to subdue prey that might be stronger than it in a straight fight. Neither strategy evolved with the other in mind, because until the 1990s, these two animals had never shared a wetland in their entire evolutionary history. In most encounters that have been documented, the outcome depends heavily on size and on which animal reacts first. When a large alligator meets a python, it can overpower quickly, clamping down on the neck or head before the snake can get a full body wrap around it. The fight is often over in seconds. That's very likely what the cyclist filmed. A python that never got the chance to constrict, killed, and being carried off before it could mount a defense. But it doesn't always go that way, and this is where the story gets more complicated than a single triumphant video suggests. In 2024, a python hunter and geoscientist working in the Everglades discovered something that shocked even researchers who study this ecosystem for a living. An 18-foot Burmese python found dead with a fully intact 5-foot alligator inside its stomach. The python had killed and swallowed the alligator whole. It was later confirmed through necropsy, a wildlife equivalent of an autopsy, that the alligator had been consumed entirely, bones and all. So which animal actually wins this fight? The honest answer, based on what scientists have observed, is it depends on who gets the first move and who's bigger. That uncertainty, this back and forth where the outcome seems to hinge on chance as much as strength, is exactly why a 2023 study from the U.S. Geological Survey became so important. Researchers implanted radio transmitters into juvenile Burmese pythons and released them back into the wild specifically to track their survival and movement patterns. It wasn't designed as a predator study. It was designed to understand python behavior. But the transmitters ended up recording something the researchers hadn't fully expected. Several of the tagged pythons were killed and eaten by alligators before they ever reached adulthood. That detail matters more than it might seem. It suggests alligators aren't just occasionally winning lucky encounters with fully grown pythons in dramatic canal-side standoffs. They may also be quietly suppressing python numbers at the vulnerable, early stage of the snake's life, the stage most nature documentaries never show because there's no viral video of it. No cyclist filming a hatchling. Just a slow, steady removal that only shows up months later in a scientist's tracking data. If that pattern holds at scale, it would mean Florida's oldest predator has been fighting this invasion the entire time. Just not in a way anyone was watching closely enough to notice. Think about why that gap in observation exists in the first place. A viral video needs a witness, a phone camera, and a moment of pure luck. A cyclist happening to pass a canal at exactly the right second. A juvenile python being killed in a flooded prairie at 3 a.m., far from any road, leaves no such witness. It only shows up as a blip on a scientist's receiver, a transmitter that stops moving and is later recovered from an alligator's territory. The dramatic footage and the quiet data point are describing the same phenomenon. They're just visible in completely different ways. Here's where the story has to slow down and separate what's confirmed from what's still being figured out. What's confirmed? Alligators do kill and eat Burmese pythons, including large adults, and this has been captured on video multiple times across multiple years in the Everglades and Big Cypress. What's confirmed? Pythons also kill and eat alligators, including cases where the python swallowed a young alligator whole. What's confirmed? At least some radio-tagged juvenile pythons in a 2023 USGS study were killed by alligators before re-aching maturity. What's not confirmed, what remains, for now, a much bigger and more consequential question, is whether alligator predation is happening at a scale large enough to meaningfully slow the python population's growth across the Everglades as a whole. A handful of viral videos and one tracking study are evidence of a real phenomenon. They are not yet evidence of a population-level turning point. Wildlife agencies have been careful not to overstate it. The python population across South Florida is still estimated in the tens of thousands, and by the state's own account, pythons remain one of the most damaging invasive species in the country. In other words, the gator in that canal video didn't save the Everglades, but it may be a visible piece of something larger and slower that scientists are only beginning to quantify. A native predator adapting, generation by generation, to a threat that arrived far too fast for evolution to prepare it. That reframes the footage completely. It's not really a story about one alligator getting lucky. It's a story about what happens when an ecosystem that has had no answer for 25 years produces, almost by accident, the beginning of one. To understand why this matters so much, you have to understand what an apex predator actually does for an ecosystem, because it's not just about who eats whom. Alligators are what ecologists call a keystone species. Their engineering of the landscape, digging gator holes that hold water through this dry season, creating habitat for fish and birds that would otherwise have nowhere to go, shapes the entire wetland around them. If pythons had continued unchecked, some researchers warned, the collapse of mammal populations could eventually ripple upward and outward, affecting the birds and predators that depend on those mammals, and ultimately reshaping the very landscape the alligators themselves rely on. Which means every python an alligator kills isn't just one less snake. It's one less snake competing for the same shrinking pool of prey the alligator itself needs to survive. Before pythons arrived, an alligator in the Everglades could count on a steady supply of raccoons, rabbits, and marsh rabbits wandering near the water's edge. In python-heavy areas today, that same alligator is hunting in a landscape where those animals have been reduced to a fraction of their former numbers. In a strange way, these two animals aren't just predator and rival. They're now locked in a direct fight over the same food source. And the winner of that fight will help determine what the Everglades looks like for the next 50 years. It's worth remembering, too, that alligators have survived worse than this. They predate the dinosaurs' closest relatives by tens of millions of years, having weathered mass extinctions, ice ages, and continental shifts that wiped out far more specialized predators. An animal with that kind of evolutionary staying power doesn't necessarily need to win quickly. It only needs to keep surviving long enough to adapt. And an alligator's lifespan, often exceeding 30 or 40 years in the wild, gives individual animals decades to learn which prey is dangerous and which is worth the risk. There's a version of this story that would be more comforting. Nature finds a way, balance restores itself, the old order reasserts control. Reality is messier than that. For every video of an alligator winning, there are far more encounters that never get filmed. Snakes that grow to adulthood, breed, and add another 50 to 100 eggs to a population that already numbers in the tens of thousands. Even if a meaningful fraction of juvenile pythons are being picked off by alligators before maturity, as the 2023 tracking data hints, python numbers have continued climbing for over 2 decades. One predator, however powerful, is unlikely to reverse that trend on its own. So researchers aren't treating alligator predation as the solution. They're treating it as a data point. One more piece of a much larger puzzle that includes hunting programs, python detecting dogs, thermal camera surveys, and ongoing genetic research into whether native predators can adapt fast enough to matter. Consider the scale of the broader effort this single alligator is quietly contributing to. Trained detector dogs can sniff out pythons hidden in brush that a human eye would walk right past. Thermal cameras mounted on trucks let hunters scan for a python's body heat against the cooler night air of the marsh. Researchers have even experimented with pheromone lures, trying to draw male pythons toward traps using the same chemical signals. Females used to attract mates during breeding season. Every one of these methods removes snakes one at a time, in a population that adds tens of thousands of eggs every single breeding season. Against that backdrop, an alligator that eats even a handful of pythons a year, multiplied across an estimated 1.3 million alligators living in Florida's wetlands and waterways, starts to look less like a curiosity and more like a standing army that never clocks out. That comparison matters because it reframes the entire relationship between these two species. Human removal programs are a seasonal intervention, a hunt that runs for a set number of days, funded by a budget that has to be renewed. Alligator predation, if it's happening consistently, is a permanent fixture of the landscape, active for as long as both species share the same water. But here's the detail that keeps coming up in interviews with the biologists studying this. Alligators have an advantage no human removal program can replicate. They don't need funding. They don't need a hunting season. They're already everywhere the pythons are, every single day, for as long as both species exist in that wetland. If natural predation is happening even at a modest but consistent rate, it compounds over years in a way that a once-a-year public hunting competition simply cannot. That's the real reason this footage has resonated the way it has. It isn't just a dramatic clip of 2 dangerous animals colliding. It's the first visible sign, however small, that the ecosystem itself might be starting to fight back on its own terms. There's also a quieter implication buried in all of this, one that researchers are only beginning to explore. Predation pressure can shape behavior, not just population numbers. If pythons that venture into open water or shallow canals are more likely to encounter alligators and die, over many generations that could nudge surviving pythons toward denser cover, changing where and how the population spreads. It's too early to say whether that's actually happening. But it's the kind of slow-motion evolutionary pressure that never shows up in a single video, only in years of tracking data compared side by side. Now go back to that canal, to the cyclist frozen on her bike, watching an alligator's eyes slowly open. She didn't know in that moment that she was looking at a live data point in one of the most consequential ecological questions. In the American Southeast, can a native apex predator, given enough time, learn to control an invader that arrived too fast and too well armed for anything else in the ecosystem to handle? Nobody can say yet whether the answer is yes. The population numbers haven't turned around. The python problem is not solved, and wildlife officials are not declaring victory. But for the first time in 25 years, the story isn't only about how far pythons have spread. It's also about what's been quietly biting back the entire time, in canals and gator holes and encounters nobody filmed, long before anyone thought to point a camera at it. Scientists studying this relationship are now watching for something specific in the years ahead. Whether the rate of alligator predation on juvenile pythons, the kind picked up by that 2023 tracking study, holds steady, increases, or fades as pythons potentially adapt their own behavior to avoid open water. If predation pressure stays consistent or grows, it could become one of the first documented cases of North America. In ecosystem developing a partial natural check on a large invasive predator without direct human engineering. If it fades, it will confirm what many biologists already suspect, that human intervention remains, for now, the only tool capable of working at the scale this crisis demands. Either way, that answer won't come from a single viral clip. It will come from years of unglamorous fieldwork. Transmitters checked, carcasses examined, population surveys repeated season after season, long after the footage of one gator and one snake has stopped trending online. The next time a video like this surfaces, watch it differently. You're not just watching one animal eat another. You're watching the oldest resident of the Everglades try to hold its ground, in real time, against a threat that arrived faster than evolution could prepare it. And you're watching one of the only ongoing experiments anywhere in the world where a native predator might actually be adapting to a modern invasive species right in front of us. If you were the cyclist on that bike, would you have kept filming? Or gotten out of there? Tell us in the comments, and if this is the kind of story you want more of, you know what to do next.